The historic city of Savannah comes to life in October. The oaks along Monterey Square seem to lean closer. The Casimir Pulaski Monument cuts a sharper silhouette, and that one house on the southwest trust lot holds the light like an ill-kept secret. From the sidewalk, you can see the wrought iron, the deep red brick, the symmetry that once announced order. Up close, you notice the details people point to when they talk in hushed tones. A window that seems to catch more than a reflection, a fence tip that doesn't quite match the rest, a set of steps that invite you forward, but something in your gut hesitates. The Mercer-Williams House is beautiful in a way that can scare people senseless. Long before the John Barrett book and the Clint Eastwood movie, The Garden of Good and Evil, this home had a reputation built on events that no trolley tour can expunge. A boy who didn't see the danger in a high perch. A late-night phone call from a man who said he had no choice. Rooms that day-lit tourists pass through by the dozen have been inspected inch by inch in another context entirely. The same tile that guides a tour once guided the slow march of a crime scene. At Christmas time, those ceilings hosted Savannah's most sought-after guest lists. At other hours, people say the house hosted things no one could account for. Stand in Monterey Square and look straight at the facade of the architectural and historical landmark that is the Mercer-Williams House. Imagine the routine of a Gatsby-esque winter party, the clink of cups, and the hospitality you show to your host. Now replace it with the silence that follows an ambulance siren's echo. The contrast is why this house has held Savannah's attention for over 50 years. It is not one story, it is several, layered across the same hardwood flooring and captured in the same stained glass window panes. Some are documented in transcripts and appellate rulings. Others survive in neighborhood shorthand, the kind of detail a tour guide will give you only after the tour is over and they go off script. When the noise of rumor, memory, and myth crowds the narrative of who Jim Williams did or did not murder, we have to dig a little deeper. But to understand what horrors this house may truly hold, we have to go behind the headlines. Construction at 429 Bull Street began in 1860, commissioned by Confederate General Hugh W. Mercer and designed by New York architect John S. Norris. Work stopped almost immediately with the outbreak of the Civil War, specifically due to Sherman's intention to burn Savannah to the ground. But when Savannah survived, cotton merchant John R. Wilder acquired the unfinished structure and oversaw completion around 1868 with the Savannah firm Muller and Bryan. Funnily enough, no member of the Mercer family ever lived in the residence that kept their name, a name well known. The original Mercer who commissioned the house's construction was great-grandfather to Johnny Mercer, one of the most notable Georgian songwriters in the 20th century. One of his songs recently resurfaced when Frank Ocean covered it, but you may know it by a more familiar name today, Moon River. Norris's design places the house within Savannah's Italianate wave, but it is not a copy of his other townhouses. It was his final Savannah work before he left the South, and classifies it alongside the Andrew Lowe House as a trust lot mansion. The summary identifies key features visible from the square: a 3-bay facade with large Florentine-style double-light windows, ornate cast-iron hood molds, and a projecting cast-iron Corinthian portico. The massing is emphatic: a heavy cornice, a semi-basement set in a moat-like areaway, and double porches running the rear elevation. Those choices explain why the house reads as a stage set facing the square while remaining open and serviceable behind. The home features deep rose-colored Philadelphia red bricks for both the house and its carriage houses, a symmetrical plan with 15-foot ceilings and floor-length windows, and a 60-foot entrance hall that still carries its original ornate ceramic tile. In short, it was and still is a McMansion. Ownership and use shifted after the Wilder family era. By the early to mid-20th century, the building had been adapted by the Savannah Shriners as their elite temple, a fraternity organization that was a community hub in Savannah. That civic use kept the house standing and visible on Monterey Square, even though it no longer served as a private residence. After the Shriners departed, the house sat vacant for a stretch, about 10 years, until a buyer with preservation ambitions stepped in. In 1969, antiques dealer and preservationist Jim Williams purchased the vacant Mercer house and began a grueling 2-year restoration project. Williams was one of Savannah's earliest and most dedicated private restorationists, and notes the project at 429 Bull Street was part of a career that encompassed more than 50 residential and non-residential structures across Savannah and the Georgia Low Country. Williams framed the restoration as a conversion back to a private home littered with Williams' collection of Regency and Empire furniture, portraiture, and decorative arts. The Mercer-Williams House is not only an architectural object, but also a museum embedding in living memory. Visitors book timed entries, step in through the Whitaker Street carriage house, which now functions more or less as a gift shop, and move through rooms that retain original touches of Jim and his prized possessions. That public-facing use keeps the building's fabric cared for and visible, and it also means the site must balance architectural interpretation with the notoriety created by late 20th century events that unfolded inside. Albeit beautiful, the house carries a reputation for tragedy separate from the case that later dominates its history. By the late 1960s, Mercer House was empty, its ornate ironwork still tracing the lot line along West Gordon Street, while the interior waited for a new owner. In 1969, the house's vacancy intersected with a young neighborhood kid's curiosity. Multiple accounts ranging from newspaper summaries to mainstream articles agree on the core event. An 11-year-old boy named Tommy Downs got onto the property, ended up at roof height, and fell to the south side where the wrought iron fence borders West Gordon Street. He was killed when he landed on the spear-tipped fencing below, his head immediately impaled, an accident widely linked to a pigeon-chasing impulse that drew him upward in the first place. The particulars beyond that shared core have shifted in the retelling. One version places Tommy on the roof of the vacant mansion, chasing birds when he lost his balance and went over the edge. That's the summary found in General Histories and Travel Features that treat the 1969 fall as one of the Mercer House's pre-midnight tragedies, and the origin point of its modern haunted reputation. Other write-ups hedge the exact height and vantage point. A digital public history entry notes that Downs fell from the roof or second-story balcony while chasing birds, and even raises the possibility that he may have been pushed. There are reports of a young friend of Tommy's who claims to have witnessed the whole incident, and he claims it looked like Tommy had been pushed. However, there was never anybody else on or in the house with little Tommy. The physical code to the fall still draws eyes. Locals and guides regularly point to the fence on the south face and discuss a damaged or missing tip. One long-standing claim is that rescuers had to saw through a spike to remove the boy's body, leaving a visible absence that visitors can seek out today. That 1969 Savannah morning, news report headline, "Tragedy Ends Pigeon Hunt," phrases it a bit differently. The prong Tommy struck broke during the incident and has since been replaced. The fine point sawed off, broken, replaced varies by source, but the presence of a visibly altered section on that West Gordon stretch is undeniable. Because the fall happened at a vacant property, official narratives fragments are sparse in public view. Retellings have filled the gaps with small embellishments. Roof versus balcony, a lunge for a bird versus a slip near the balustrade. The reliable overlap remains stark. An 11-year-old boy, a fall from above, the southern fence of the property, and a fatal skull impalement. That overlap also explains how the incident migrated from neighborhood tragedy to durable lore. Tour guides repeat the pigeon chase and emphasize the south side fence. Haunted tours add unverified possibilities, like a shove or a balcony stumble, which is sheer speculation, as there is no way to really know how or why Tommy fell. The theory that he was pushed is simply that, a theory and a community belief rather than what evidence shows. In 1969, before Mercer House's next chapter began, and another name was added to its title, Tommy Downs died after falling from a height onto the West Gordon Street fence. Later that same year, Jim Williams purchased the long vacant property and started the restoration that would define both the building's look and its public mythology. The child's death didn't cause what came next, but it set a mood around the address. One grim episode already attached to the gates before the 1980s put the house at the center of Savannah's most infamous shooting. Jim Williams arrived in Savannah in the 1950s as an ambitious antiques dealer, and by the end of the 1960s, he had planted himself in Monterey Square with a project that would anchor his reputation. In 1969, he bought the long vacant Mercer House and undertook a 2-year restoration that returned the Italianate mansion to showpiece condition. The house was not simply a residence, it became a public calling card for the way Williams wanted Savannah to look and feel. Over 3 decades in the city and low country, he restored more than 50 buildings, a volume of work local institutions still cite when they explain why Mercer House today operates as a museum of his art, antiques, and approach to preservation. The point for Williams was that Savannah's architectural bones could be revived at scale and with polish, and Mercer House was the best place in town to prove it. His footprint extended off Monterey Square. Earlier, the historic Savannah Foundation had stepped in to save major properties from demolition, and Williams bought the Armstrong House in 1967 from the foundation and restored it as his home before it later became law offices. He also poured money and attention into landmark commercial properties, most famously the Old Pink House on Reynolds Square, treating old masonry and worn interiors as a portfolio to be brought current and resold. Whatever the resale, the key was the pattern: buy, restore, move on to the next. By the mid-1980s, he had taken on Granite Hall at 126 East Gaston, a restoration he would not live to finish. His mission remained the same. He was a private preservationist with a public sensibility, using his purchases to advance a citywide aesthetic. As if Williams wasn't already beloved throughout Savannah, when he moved into the Mercer House, he became a true socialite. Through the 1970s, his black tie Christmas party developed into a Savannah institution, the kind of invitation that signaled who was in good standing with the hosts, and by extension, with the city's old guard. Guests counted on a once-a-year spectacle inside those high-ceilinged rooms. Whatever other more sinister titles were attached to him, Williams was a social organizer who knew how to throw a great party. In the early hours of May 2nd, 1981, at 2:58 a.m., Officer Nancy Slaughter of Savannah Police took a call from a man who identified himself as Jim Williams. He said he had been involved in a shooting and asked that officers be sent. A friend later testified that Williams had already called him between 2:20 and 2:35 a.m., saying, "I just had to shoot Danny." When police reached the house, Williams opened the front door and told them, "I shot him. He's in the other room." In the hall, a grandfather clock lay on its side. In the study beyond, officers found 21-year-old Danny Hansford face down with his right hand above his head and a pistol under his hand. A detective recorded smeared blood on Hansford's right wrist and fingers placed over the gun. Autopsy and scene work documented 3 gunshot wounds to the chest, to the back, and above the right ear. Tests on Hansford's right hand found no gunshot residue. 4 spent shell casings were collected in the room. Investigators also noted a leg of an upright chair resting on the cuff of Hansford's pants. A bullet went through papers on Williams' desk with lead fragments recovered from a chair behind it, and small paper scraps sitting atop the pistol Williams had used. These details would become the entire case. From that evidence, the state built a straightforward theory. Williams shot Hansford with 1 gun, placed it on the desk, fired a second gun across the desk to simulate an incoming shot, then pulled Hansford's right hand out and slid the second gun underneath to stage self-defense. Williams, for his part, testified that an argument escalated. Hansford threw him, left the room, made a commotion in the hall, then returned with a pistol and fired at him. Williams said he grabbed his own pistol from the desk and fired 3 quick shots. The physical artifacts, blood, paper scraps on a gun left on the desk, the position of the chair, and the chair leg on the pant cuff were either the scaffolding of a staged scene or a messy remainder of a close-quarters shooting. At the first trial, the prosecution also introduced evidence that Williams and Hansford were in a homosexual relationship. The case ended with a conviction for murder and a life sentence, but on January 4th, 1983, the Georgia Supreme Court reversed, citing a Brady violation. A police report from the night of the shooting included a reference to a fresh gunshot found in a bedroom floor hole from an earlier April 3rd incident involving the same pair. At trial, the state's witness had testified he could not say whether that hole was new or old. The withheld "fresh" notation undercut him. The court concluded the prosecution's assurance to the defense, and the judge that nothing in the report contradicted the officer's testimony was patently inconsistent, and ordered a new trial. The reversal was not a comment on self-defense versus staging. It was a sanction for suppressing material that impaired the truth-seeking function of the trial. Williams was retried and convicted again on October 8, 1983. 2 years later, the Georgia Supreme Court reversed that conviction too, this time on evidentiary grounds related to Brady. The justices held that a Savannah detective had been allowed to give expert opinions that were not beyond a lay juror's understanding. Conclusions such as the victim's hand being moved after death, the impossibility of Hansford moving the chair over his pants after being shot, and the inference that Williams placed his own pistol on the desk before the other pistol was fired across it. The court reasoned those were ultimate issue arguments the jury could draw without expert gloss. The opinion also flagged a second problem. During the closing argument, the prosecutor had a small assistant district attorney point the alleged Hansford gun at a wall and pull the heavy trigger to rebut testimony about its difficulty. The demonstration introduced new evidence during summation when the defense had no chance to test it. Reversal followed, and the case went back yet again. A third trial in 1987 ended with a hung jury, or a jury that simply couldn't agree on a conclusion. The vote stood at 11-1 for conviction when the judge declared a mistrial. That proceeding also surfaced a narrow but important problem with the scientific trail. A hospital emergency room form suggested, with some ambiguity, that Hansford's hands may not have been bagged at the scene, contrary to prior testimony. If the bagging occurred later at the hospital, defense lawyers argued any gunpowder residue could have been disturbed. The ambiguity did not exonerate Williams, but it complicated one of the state's cleanest points. Before a fourth trial could be held, Williams moved to bar re-prosecution on double jeopardy grounds and to disqualify District Attorney Spencer Lawton and his staff based in part on post-trial public comments Lawton had made after the third mistrial. On May 26, 1988, the Georgia Supreme Court rejected both arguments. The justices reiterated that reversals for trial error, even prosecutorial error, did not typically invoke the double jeopardy bar. Only evidentiary insufficiency or misconduct aimed at goading the defense into seeking a mistrial could do that. They also found no basis to disqualify the prosecutor's office under professional conduct rules. The path to a fourth trial stayed open. The fourth trial was moved out of Savannah to Augusta to mitigate local publicity and the gravitational pull of community opinion. In May 1989, a Richmond County jury of 6 men and 6 women deliberated about an hour and acquitted Williams of murder. This procedural journey was exceptionally rare. 2 Savannah convictions overturned on appeal, 1 Savannah mistrial, then vindication in Augusta. In the courtroom, the verdict turned on the same pivot points: who fired first, what the physical scene provided, and whether the state's inferences overcame the defense's claim of self-defense. If Savannah ran on optics, Williams understood the formula. Within days of the acquittal, local coverage framed him as quickly re-entering society's inner rooms. He planned to deck the high-ceiling halls again and host his Christmas gala for the loyal 200. That line landed because it matched the city's memory of him, a preservationist who could bend a broken house back into form, and a host who could fill such rooms with enough ceremony to make them feel important again. The legal saga had pulled him from that role for 8 years. The 1989 party was designed to put him back in it. 8 months later, on January 4th, 1990, his staff could not reach him and let themselves in. Williams, 59, was found unresponsive at home and pronounced dead. The cause of death was ruled as pneumonia and heart failure. His attorney, Sonny Sealer, later described finding Williams in the doorway between the study and the hallway, an image that stuck because of where the case had started. The documentation of his death is clinical. The autopsy and news reports emphasize illness and cardiac failure, but the location invited the kind of folklore Savannah never quite resists. That is Williams' entire arc inside Mercer House. The buyer who risked cash and taste on a landmark when it was empty. The preservationist who multiplied that bet dozens of times across the historic district. The host whose Christmas party mattered enough to be measured, the defendant whose case turned on paper scraps, blood smears, and a chair leg set just so, the man who outlasted 2 overturned convictions and a hung jury to win acquittal in Augusta, and the Savannian who died months later, still in the house he had used for so long as a stage. The city remembers him as a builder, as a figure in a murder case, and remembers the party lights glowing in December. When people talk about invitations stacked in and out boxes before the gala, they are not reaching for legend. That detail comes from the best-selling account that followed, which captured the tone of the room as much as its layout. The boxes may be long gone. The hierarchy the party enforced lingers in memory because it was real. After Williams' death, Mercer House stayed in the family and eventually opened as a museum reachable through the carriage house entrance on Whitaker Street. The tour script leans into his preservation work and collections rather than the courtroom chronology, but the two are inseparable when you look at the whole timeline. The same eye that elevated woodwork and plaster guided the staging of a party and prosecutors argued, and the staging of a crime scene. The same instance on control that warmed certain guests and iced out others made him a formidable defendant on the stand. The facts don't need embellishment. It's a wild story. The square is quiet at night, the house is heavy with history, and the study, whether you call it haunted or simply remembered, still fixes the city's attention exactly where the evidence put it. Inside the historic house, photography is restricted, and the tour sticks to architecture collections and Jim Williams restoration. Staff are not eager to entertain ghost questions, and longtime owner Dorothy Kingery, sister of Jim, was on record as never having experienced anything supernatural in the home. That line keeps the official story tidy. The folklore lives mostly outside the ropes, in street-side snapshots, on walking tours, and in the way locals talk about what they think they saw in the windows after dark. The most persistent thread centers on the boy who died on the south fence in 1969, Tommy Downs. Ghost tour operators and bloggers repeat that over the years, a fair-haired child has appeared in photographs of the house, peeking from an upper window or perched like a lookout along the roofline. Some storytellers add that the boy's spirit reenacts his fall in a grim loop, a residual haunting, rather than an interactive one. Others stick to lighter claims, a fleeting figure in glass, a face where no one was standing. The physical prompt is right there at eye level on West Gordon Street, where guides point out a repaired or missing spear point and connected it to rescue efforts the night Tommy died. Careful observers note there are a few irregularities along the fence, which complicates the idea of a single telltale gap. Still, the child in the window photo tale is the one most visitors hear, and it is the one most often cited when people explain why the house feels haunted before you even step inside it. The 1981 shooting in the study adds a second layer to the lore, the idea that Danny Hansford or Jim Williams himself never entirely left. U.S. Ghost Adventures, one of the tour outfits that collects anecdotes, say staff and visitors have reported full-body apparitions of Williams, moving through hallways as if supervising a party in progress. The same piece claims sightings of Hansford pacing those same routes. The two men, like ships in the night, a detail that shows up often in retellings, that Williams sought out a practitioner to cleanse the house before he believed Hansford's spirit would not let him be. Whether that occurred or not, the pattern is consistent across visitor-facing sources. Williams seen as a presence in his own house, Hansford described as restless, and the study imagined as the magnet point where any haunting would concentrate. Neighbors and passerby have also felt a specific soundtrack into the legend, a seasonal one that circles back to Williams' Christmas party. More than one tour site repeats the claim that on the traditional party night in December, the chandeliers seem to burn brighter and silhouettes move across the glass, as if guests have gathered again in their finery. The story usually comes paired with accounts of music and laughter heard from the street on nights when the house is closed and quiet, a phantom party that lets the social calendar repeat itself without a guest list. Those are subjective reports, not records anyone can verify, but they have traction because they tie directly to something Savannah remembers about the living Williams. He loved a good party. Beyond those marquee tales are the typical notes you hear attached to many of Savannah's haunted stops: disembodied voices on the stairs, footsteps that start and stop on the landing, a pocket of cold air in a heated home. Some visitors swear the windows act like mirrors with their own agenda, producing reflections that look like faces when reviewed later. The internet is full of caught something at Mercer images, from a face in a lower right pane to a figure in a darkened sash. The house's no photography policy inside means almost all of those claims come from the sidewalk, and they circulate in forums where believers and skeptics argue over pixels. Even tour summaries that avoid sensational detail admit the house sits near the top of most haunted Savannah lists, which is why guides keep stopping on the house edge of Monterey Square to tell these stories again. If you want to hear about specters, you'll hear it from a guide in the square or local, not from someone selling you a ticket at the carriage house. Ghost City's profile flatly says you are unlikely to get ghost talk from the staff, and that questions on that topic are discouraged. U.S. Ghost Adventures frames Kingery's stance as politely skeptical and emphasizes that the house's keepers prioritize preservation and interpretation over the paranormal. That split is part of what keeps the rumors alive. The house declines to validate the stories, but it also does not erase the clues: the repaired fence, the famous study, the December memories, the things that keep people pointing and whispering on evening walks. As with any urban legend cluster, the province of individual anecdotes varies. Some are clearly promotional, watchwords to sell a ticket. Some are neighborhood memories that have hardened into tradition. Some live online as photographs a stranger insists are real. The volume is what matters more than any single account. The house is beautiful, the tragedies are documented, and the windows are large enough to make your brain invent a face if you stand there long enough. People come primed to see something, which may be the most reliable explanation Savannah offers for why the Mercer-Williams House always makes the haunted list. If you want the hard lines between rumor and record, you've already heard them. If you want the atmospherics that Savannah invites, they are the echoes, reflections, and the party night stories that keep Monterey Square busy after dark. If you stand here late, the square offers its own closing argument. It gives you a child's name that never left the gate, a young man whose last steps crossed a tile hall, and a host who filled the house with people who knew where they stood by which box their invitation landed in. It gives you a city that keeps time in parties, funerals, and appellate dates, that still points to an upstairs pane and swears someone is there. Houses like this do not choose their legends. They collect them. The fence keeps its scars, the study keeps its geometry, and the neighborhood keeps a kind of memory you feel first and prove later. Whether you call that a haunting or just a place that refuses to forget is up to you. This has been Joshua John with Behind the Headlines, and until next time, stay safe.